Ahoy there! Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another episode of the Destroyer Pilot's Manifesto, the series that aims to teach you everything you need to know about the various different destroyers in EVE Echoes. Now, with loads of us beginning now to hit Tech 9, I thought it was worth having a look at some of the Tech 9 destroyers, which are of course the Tier 2 INTERDICTOR destroyers, and the INTERDICTOR destroyers are all part of the mainline gunboat destroyers, so Thrashers, the Coercers, the Cormorants, and the Catalysts. Now, of course, when I'm going to be looking at these, the first one we're going to examine is, of course, the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR. It's going to be the Thrasher model, because everyone knows how much Benzie loves his Thrashers, to the point that there is even a t-shirt design on our Redbubble merchandise store that sports the Thrasher design on it. The Air Benzie Nullsec Tours, taking you up close and personal. Do make sure to check that link out in the description down below. It's a cool t-shirt that my very talented wife designed, and I do hope you guys enjoy that one. It made me laugh like an absolute clown when I first saw it. Anyway, so what we're going to do in today's video is we're going to be having a look at the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR, have a look at its stats, what these mean, and then discuss how you use this ship. Now, this is of course going to be a fairly controversial topic. We're talking about an INTERDICTOR vessel, which means we're going to be demonstrating INTERDICTOR spheres, which of course means we're going to be looking at Gatecamps. Now, Gatecamps are one of these things that some people love, some people hate, some people recognise as a necessary evil, some people just accept that it's part of EVE. So we are going to actually go a little bit into the morality behind Gatecamps as well, because I know a lot of you are going to literally open up this video, see that I'm talking about Gatecamps, and be like, oh my god, I can't believe that Catskull supports Gatecamping. Yes, of course we do. It's a big part of EVE, and it is absolutely vital to the certain operation of certain of alliances and nullsecs. There's a reason they put INTERDICTOR spheres into the game, folks, and it's not just to look at because they're pretty on a shelf, which admittedly the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR is. Look at it, it's such a pretty ship. But what we're going to do is talk about all of this, and as I said, we'll discuss the morality of Gatecamping and why I think this is an important part, and what we can all do about it and what we can learn from it. Anyway, if you enjoy the video, let me know by hitting like on it, sub to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell, and of course make sure that you select to receive all information so that you never miss a video. Check out that Redbubble merchandise store that I've already mentioned, and of course if you do want to go the extra mile, we do have a Patreon page. You can come to pledge and donate your support there as well. Every dollar is really helpful. All of you guys are so awesome. I love you all so much. Anyway, that said and done, then I think it's time to jump in and talk about the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR. First of all then, we need to of course familiarise ourselves with the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR's ship stats and attributes. So we're going to head into the Minmatar Republic ship tree, climb the Destroyer branch all the way up to tech level 9, and here of course we have the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR. And I'm going to be comparing this to the Thrasher fleet issue. Now, the reason I'm doing that and not to the Tier 6 Thrasher INTERDICTOR is because the Tier 6 variant, it's just categorically worse. There is no reason you would ever fly a Thrasher INTERDICTOR other than the cost over a Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR. It's a direct upgrade. Yes, the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR costs more, but all of its stats are 100%, you know, they're improvements. There is nothing that the Thrasher INTERDICTOR does better than the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR. Now, back in the Thrasher INTERDICTOR video, I started to compare it briefly to the Thrasher fleet issue in terms of it being a solo ship. And if you remember back to that video, and I'll put a link in the description if you haven't watched it, if you remember back to that video, you'll remember that I said that ultimately the Thrasher fleet issue and the Thrasher INTERDICTOR, it's kind of a you win some, you lose some. There are some things that the Thrasher fleet issue is better for, some things that the INTERDICTOR is better for. It's kind of a mixed bag. So we're going to have a look here at the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR and see if this also is a better solo ship than the fleet issue. Now, in regards to its looks as well, it's worth pointing out that the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR is loosely based on the Sabre from EVE Online. Slightly different graphics here. You can see this is more of a sort of greeny, coppery look to it, which I actually really quite like. It's quite handsome without it being overly ostentatious. And Mars ships. Interesting enough, as I said, it's called the Sabre, which continues the Minmatar theme of naming ships either after predatorial animals, or indeed, like the Scythe and the Talwar, after various different weaponry. And of course, a Sabre is a kind of sword. Anyway, let's have a look at the attributes and fittings here of the Thrasher 2 INTERDICTOR. First of all, its fitting profile. We've got 4 high slots, 4 mid slots, 3 low slots, 3 combat rigs, and 3 engineering rigs. Now, of course, I'm going to sit there and come up with my usual line, I wish that was 5 high slots, but hey, We all know how Benzie feels about the destroyers, and that he thinks they should all have an extra high slot. We all know that NetEase is currently disagreeing with him, but we're going to start petitions, aren't we, folks? Yes, we are, and we're going to get all the signatures, and we're going to get NetEase to agree with us, and put a 5th turret on every single one of the destroyers from Tech 4 upwards. Anyway, so 4 high slots, of course, this is all the same as the Thrasher fleet issue. We get an additional mid slot, which you'd expect, because obviously being an interdictor, interdictor spheres are going to be a thing, so we're going to be looking at interdiction launches, we're going into the mid slots, and we do get the 3rd power grid, combat rig, and 3rd mechanical rig. I can't believe I still call them power grid rigs. 3rd combat rig, and 3rd engineering rig. So that, of course, can be used to increase the versatility of your ship if you want extra shielding, if you want extra straight-up damage on your cannons, that kind of thing. You can put all of those into those rigs there. Now, the defense here of the Thrasher 2 Interdictor is quite a significant upgrade over the fleet issue. Now, the fleet issue, of course, does have a skill bonus that gives it additional shield up to 25%. The Thrasher 2 Interdictor is therefore overtaken ever so slightly, but you'll see later, that doesn't really matter. It's literally less than 100 in the difference, which is, you know, quite surprising considering the fleet issue is getting that from a big skill bonus. Otherwise though, capacitor and power grid are both bigger as well. You're looking at a power grid here of 52 megawatts compared to the fleet issue's 49, and a capacitor of 578 over the fleet issue's 477. So we can run things like shield modules, propulsion units, all of that without worrying too much about the capacitor, and the additional power grid there, it doesn't sound like much, just 3 additional megawatts, but it means with enough training into destroyer engineering, it is much easier to fit strike cannons onto the Thrasher 2 Interdictor than it is onto the fleet issue, which I suppose is kind of to be expected, especially if you're going for the higher tier, higher meta level ones like the Gisty C types. Anyway, as we come further down though, as I said, the fact that the Thrasher 2 Interdictor is ever so slightly behind a fully skilled Thrasher fleet issue on defense doesn't really matter, because we get a massive reduction to the signature radius. The Thrasher fleet issue signature radius was 48.3, here it's 38.8, we're nearly 10 meters smaller, which is a massive decrease and really makes for a much more survivable interdictor here, which is kind of the point. If you're flying an interdictor in a fleet and you're being the point for a gate camp, you are target numero uno, so making you smaller and harder to hit is kind of the way that you survive that. You are more fragile than a lot of the other ships out there, but curiously enough, if you actually have a look at the raw HP etc here, for the Thrasher 2 Interdictor, it's 2nd highest on the list. It's only outdone by the Coercer 2 Interdictor. It's, you know, more tanky, theoretically, in regards to its actual statistics at least. Straight up defense, that is. It's tankier than either the Catalyst Interdictor or the Cormorant Interdictor, which is really saying something, because Cormorants are supposed to be pretty tanky, you know? But the Thrasher 2 actually has higher defenses, and a smaller signature radius, and a higher flight velocity, 340 meters per second. Again, that's a big upgrade over the fleet issue's 297. You're looking at a faster, smaller ship that has slightly lower defenses than the fleet issue, but gets a lot more firepower and more fittings, thanks to the rig slots, etc. there. The mass and the inertia, however, are exactly the same, which tends to be the same across most hulls like this. As we move into the trait descriptions, of course, it's a Thrasher, so it gets that 25% increase to small cannon optimal range. All Thrasher hulls have this bonus, plus we get the roll bonus of can fit interdiction sphere launches. It's an interdictor. If the name didn't give it away, I'm really not sure what to tell you. Yes, interdictors can fit interdiction sphere launchers. It's kind of the main purpose of them existing. And yes, again, I'm going to jump back and say I understand a lot of you don't like interdictors and find gate camping to be a fairly cheap thing. Bear with me, we're getting to that part of the video later on. I want to focus on the ship and talk about like how you can use it solo first of all, then we'll talk about the gate camps later on. Again, if you're getting bored with this bit, jump ahead using the links in the description below. I always put timestamps in the description. Anyway, our skill bonuses. First of all, Advanced Destroyer Command bonus here is giving us a 12% increase to small cannon damage. That's obviously 60% increase at full training. Compare that to the Thrasher fleet issue, getting a small cannon damage increase of plus 7.5% per level, which is 37.5 at full training. You're almost doubling your theoretical DPS here with the Thrasher 2 Interdictor over the Thrasher fleet issue. That's thanks both to that skill and the ability to fit an additional combat rig. The downside downside is that the fleet issue did have a small cannon tracking skill increase, which isn't the case here, so your cannons do struggle a bit more to apply that damage, but you should theoretically have skilled up into small cannon operation, small cannon upgrade, etc. So you should have higher skills than you did back on the fleet issue anyway, and that should kind of account for that. Of course, if you're using those skills and you've got the fleet issue, yeah, you've got better tracking, but I think, honestly, the additional damage here that the Thrasher 2 Interdictor can kick out kind of makes up for it. Although I am still one day hoping that we get combat rigs that allow us to increase the tracking of our particular cannons. I would love the ability to actually add additional cannon tracking, especially to things like a Tornado or a Maelstrom, and go for some brawling builds with stuff like that. But, yeah, again, it's something we're looking forward to in the future. Now, whereas the Thrasher fleet issue also got bonuses to its shields, its scan resolution, and scan strength, etc., the Thrasher 2 Interdictor, of course being an interdictor, gets skill bonuses from advanced propulsion jamming, which increases the duration of an interdictor sphere's lifetime in space. 37.5% of full training there. When it says flight time, it's just how long that bubble actually stays in space. And having the ability to keep a bubble there longer means you can either drop more bubbles, so you can have more bubbles around a particular gate or point or whatever it is that you're trying to camp. Plus, it means you're going to be using less fuel if you're only keeping one or two of these up at a time. So it's a minor benefit there, and certainly not something you need to train into if you're going to use this ship as a solo PvE runner, which, spoiler alert, the Thrasher 2 Interdictor is surprisingly good at. So let's have a look then at fitting this ship for exactly that, PvE, combat encounter running as a solo player. And this is genuinely a really good ship for this. Like, I'm having a lot of fun flying through Tech 9 encounters, Tech 8, Tech 9 encounters, and I can do Tier 10 anomalies without too much worry at all here in the Thrasher 2 Interdictor. To showcase what this fit can do, we've got an offensive DPS here of 392.17, our defense is 7059, of course most of that is in the shield, fairly solid there at 2172, our capacitor is completely stable and fairly comfortably stable at that if we get any form of neutralizing hitting us. For targeting, we have a high scan resolution of 860mm, a low signature radius of 39 meters, and we get a surprisingly fast flight speed, for a destroyer at least, of 506.6 meters per second. Warp preparation time also isn't too bad, 2.98. Yes, okay, the magic number theoretically is 2, which makes you physically impossible to catch if you're trying to warp. However, 2.98 means that your opponent literally has 0.98 seconds to start locking onto you, finish locking on, and activate a scramble module in order to grab you. So yeah, it's a very small window of opportunity there. Now, we're actually also doing this using prototype rigs. Spoiler alert, we're going to come back to that later. Anyway, looking at the high slots, I've gone for a set of criminal small autocannons. Obviously, whichever small autocannons you can get your hands on, doesn't matter if they're criminal or otherwise. I could go for Gisty C-types, I just didn't have any lying around. And surprisingly, criminal small autocannons are blasted cheap on the market right now. Like, seriously, go grab them. We've got an incredibly high tracking speed on these, 504, very high damage, you can see 125 on both thermal and explosive, with 83.1 on the kinetic in the middle there. We do have a very short optimal range of 1.85, which is being increased thank you to the ship's hull, and we're getting an accuracy fall-off of 6.81 kilometers, which is a very slow and gentle accuracy fall-off. Means if you can't quite sit at that 2 kilometer, you're only out at 3. You're not really using much effectiveness at all. You're not losing hardly anything thanks to how slow and gentle that accuracy fall-off actually is. For our mid-slots, for PvE, of course, there's no point putting a interdiction sphere launcher on here. It's not worth it. It doesn't do anything. So I've gone for instead for the usual tackle module setup of a warp scrambler and a fleet, well, a stasis webifier here, a Republic fleet in both of those. Ultimately, the idea here is that the warp scrambler can be used to turn off an enemy rat's micro warp drive, and the stasis webifier, of course, can be used if it's just a fast-moving ship and you want to slow it down, if it's using an afterburner or whatever. and just make it an easier target to hit there. This goes then nicely with our low slots. I've got 2 Rebirth Gyro Stabilizers, which of course cannon weapon upgrade modules, increases your damage and decreases the activation time, and you can activate it for an even bigger boost of those. And a Ranger Small Afterburner gives us our momentum for moving around the battlefield and for ultimately speed tanking. We're not a dedicated speed tank. We're not small enough or fast enough to be a full-on speed tank, you know, a la the Dramiel or the you know, any of the tackle frigates, interceptors, that kind of thing, but it does help you mitigate an awful lot of damage, and that helps you survive. You'll notice there are no tanking modules here in the low slots, and that's because here in the mid slots, I've gone for 2 Mark 9 large group shield boosters. Now again, Mark 7s will work absolutely fine here, although if you're able to fit a Mark 9, kind of, why wouldn't you? Again, it's only cost. What this does is it converts fuel, so things like plasmoids or liquid ozone, etc., into healing. Here you can see 401 shield boost, but that is only every 20 seconds. Now, because I've got the space for 2, I've fitted 2. That means we're getting basically 401 every 10 seconds. As a tip, you don't activate both of these at the same time unless you really need to. The best thing to do is as you start taking damage, activate one of them, 10 seconds later, activate the second one, and let them cycle in counter step like that. It means you're basically then getting 401 every 10 seconds rather than getting 802 every 20 seconds. And it may sound mathematically similar, but the concept there is that you are keeping yourself topped up. If something does more than 802 damage in a 20-second period, you are at a net loss. It's hard to describe, but trust me, ultimately the idea is that it helps you out-heal quickly, and it means you don't ever really push down into armor unless things start going really, really wrong. But again, it helps you stay alive. I have 2 of these running at the start of a wave, and I will switch one of them off as necessary, and eventually I can switch the second one off as well and save my fuel. Obviously it does mean as well you're not using any capacitor. That's a big point here. This doesn't affect stability. If I'm being completely neutralized by something, I can activate both of these and still be healed even at 0 capacitor. At 0 capacitor, I can still deal damage and I can still heal myself, and I'm still a fairly small, fairly fast moving target, which is a very powerful thing in PvP. Now, I actually watched a friend of mine from Catskull, Frosty Jack, out in an anomaly recently. He jumped into, I think I can't remember if it was a Scout or an Inquisitor, found a Daredevil in it. As he went to warp away, got locked by the Daredevil, only to find that actually he was out-healing the Daredevil's damage, like he was dying slower, and doing some rather supreme damage. Unfortunately, the Daredevil did manage to, at the very last moment, about halfway through hull, outrange the Scrambler and warp away to safety, but we have proof that a Thrasher 2 Interdictor can take out a Daredevil if it has the right positioning. That's terrifying. That's genuinely really quite terrifying, and is exactly what a Thrasher, well, what a Destroyer is designed to do: take out frigates. Anyway, for the rigs, as I said, these are all prototypes. As you'll see, I've gone for 2 burst aerators and a cannon collision accelerator, straight up raw DPS, but you may want to swap the collision accelerator for additional shield, like either making your shield tank bigger. That's a great one to have, the extender that just makes your shield bigger. I wouldn't necessarily go for the one that increases your shield boost amount or capacitor, because they don't work with the with the group shield boosters. What does work is the one that increases the maximum size of your shield or increases your resistances, so like anti-EM screen reinforcers, that kind of thing can take up this slot here. On the other side of things as well, I've then gone for a polycarbon engine housing and 2 auxiliary thruster prototypes, just getting me that little bit extra speed there, and the ability to orbit a little bit tighter with that inertia modifier being dropped, and that's giving me the stats that you saw earlier. And everything that I'm going to be showing in this video is using this. After recording this video, I am actually going to start rigging this out. I'm enjoying this ship a lot, so I am going to start upgrading those from prototypes to standard rigs, and I'll let you guys know what the difference there is. I'll see if I can add it into the video in just a second. So after I recorded all of this video, I went back and, as I said I would, upgraded all of the rigs to Tech 2 variants. You'll see this is the same ship, same modules and that in a moment, but I've upgraded the 2 cannon burst aerators to tier 2, a collision accelerator tier 2, we've still got the 2 auxiliary thrusters going up to tier 2, and the polycarbon engine housing. As I said, the modules are still exactly the same here as we saw earlier, no change at all in the actual fitting. But going up to Tech 2 rigs rather than prototype has increased our offensive DPS to 456.06, and our navigation, our max velocity has gone up to 567.8 meters per second, with the warp preparation time dropping down to 2.69. Now, that's a significant increase, I suppose, but whether or not it's worth the additional approximately 100 million ISK that it costs to do that is entirely up to you. As you'll see, with the prototype rigs, I still managed to clear the Tech 10 anomaly without a single hassle. It's still a comfortable ship with those prototypes. Ultimately, the extra DPS and the extra flight velocity, etc. is nice to have, but it's not necessary, so if it's worth the additional cost to you, it really is up to you. It's a personal decision that you'll need to make. I will say that when it comes to the fitting it as an actual interdictor, as you'll see later on, we still go with the idea of keeping it cheap, because an interdictor is always going to be a primary target in an engagement, which means you are highly likely to lose it, so you want to keep it cheap. But for PvE, whether or not it's worth that additional upgrade for that additional DPS and agility is entirely up to you. I want to showcase this first of all by jumping into a Tech 10 Angel Small Anomaly, and I'm going to jump in here at 0 range because obviously we're using autocannons and we need to be quite close to things, and I'm just going to showcase how this works, and we will talk about how long this takes to complete, kind of what the value of doing all this is here as well, like, you know, ISK per hour, etc. Anyway, we arrive, we lock on, I pick a target, I activate one of my shield boosters. I actually do that a little bit early, that should be done only once you start taking damage, so now I've got the afterburner active, and I start my orbit. And you'll see I take very little damage here. I don't actually feel the need to activate that second shield booster just yet. It heals about 14% of my shield per activation. You'll see it's going to activate now. Shoots me almost all the way back up to 100%. So for this wave, we're absolutely fine. We're taking almost no damage at all from these guys. One of those group shield boosters is absolutely plenty, but I'm going to put a second one on there just to kind of showcase how ridiculously unnecessary it actually is. I do take a little bit of damage, but oh, there we go, and it's healed right back up again. Now I am going to skip this video ahead a little bit. Again, as you can see, I do record this sort of ahead of time, and I come back and do the voiceover over it. You can see it takes a little bit of time here to get through something like a Maelstrom, just because it's tanky as all heck, and it's about 7 minutes, 8 minutes into the first wave. Here we are, yeah, about 8 minutes, and that wave goes down. So let's see what happens next. Wave 2 appears. Again, we've got 5 ships this time around, so it's a little bit bigger than before. I'm going to quickly loot that battleship before we get out, except no, I don't, which means I sit like a duck for a brief second, which means I'm probably going to take a couple of hits. But there we go. No, we're good. We're good. We're moving in on that Thrasher interceptor. I'm now going to activate the group shield booster, all the other modules to try and take that down, and we're going to see how much damage we take. Now this time I am taking a lot more damage because I've come in on a bad approach and there's more ships, so I'm going to activate that second group shield booster and away we go. We're now tanking this quite nicely. Fingers crossed we should take a little bit less damage as we go now, as we're destroying these other ships. Less damage with the healing I've currently got should keep me alive quite nicely. It's worth mentioning as well, if you're doing content with friends and you've all got group shield boosters equipped, every time a friend activates a group shield booster, if you're in range, you get the benefits from that too. These are probably one of the most amazing modules for small pilots in EVE Echoes. I mean, heck, if I'm flying destroyers and frigates, I tend to try and get one of these fitted at all times. If I'm going with friends, it means every time they heal, I heal up as well, and vice versa. You just become infinitely more tanky, exponentially rather, better word, exponentially more tanky as you add more other ships to that roam, each with a group shield booster. Now here you can see I'm taking so little damage now that I'm quite happy to swap down and just have one of these cycling as we go. And that's really it. You see I take almost no damage now. I'm doing pretty good DPS output to these ships, especially for something like a frigate or a destroyer. For a Tech 10 anomaly, this is really only matched by faction frigates, like this kind of damage output. which I think really says something. So everyone's sitting there saying, oh, destroyers are useless. Watch this, like I'm doing Tech 10 encounters here in a destroyer that is cheaper than a faction frigate, but is kicking out basically the same damage as a faction frigate. Okay, not quite as much as I can possibly squeeze with my Dramiel or my Daredevil, but those are very expensive ships comparatively, and this is, you know, it's just a destroyer. This is nowhere near the cost of something like a fully fit Dramiel. I think this entire ship, hull plus all the fittings on here, is less than 200 million, whereas like a Dramiel or a Daredevil, you won't even get the hull for that. So yeah, we've got a good runner here, and it's ultimately still going to clear that Tech 10 content, still going to get good ISK out of this. The whole encounter here, all 4 waves of this, took me about 35 minutes, which is not long at all for a Tech 10 encounter. Now in that time, I earned, I think, about 5-6 million, plus the loot, which is just insane. And I can take this up into high sec, and I can run Tech 8 encounters, no trouble at all. The Tech 9 encounters, the rare like 4.5 million ones you get, it can do as well. It gets a little bit scary early on. You do have to have both of your shield boosters active, and you do take a little bit of damage, but you usually find that you've killed enough ships to reduce the amount of damage you're taking to something that you can out-heal before you hit armor. And that's kind of the key point I want to make here, that the idea isn't necessarily to survive indefinitely without taking any damage. The idea is that if my shield is gradually going down, as long as I can kill stuff quickly enough that I never quite hit armor, and then my actual healing, my heal per second, can out-heal the amount of damage I'm taking. And that's very much the point we're getting at. Very powerful. I think I've showcased this quite nicely here. I am going to jump ahead in the video because we've got a lot of other things now to talk about. When swapping this to a gate camping fit, ultimately there's only a few modifications I make. Firstly, in the mid slots I do drop one of the group shield boosters, of course, for our Mark 9 Interdiction Sphere launcher. It's not much use flying an Interdictor in a gate camp without an Interdiction Sphere launcher. Of course, this is what is going to drop your bubbles and actually hold enemy ships in position long enough for your guys to get them. Now, I talk about gate camps, I just want to jump aside very quickly here. Interdiction Sphere launchers aren't always just used for gate camps. These are excellent for use in like fleet engagements too. Jump one of these into the middle of your enemy fleet, drop an Interdiction Sphere launcher, and try and power away to an Interdiction Sphere, and try and power away to safety. Even if you do get destroyed, chances are you've held every single enemy ship there in position long enough for something to get blown up. Now, because survivability is the name of the game when you are being an interdictor pilot actually involved in interdiction, you are target priority number 1. Someone sees an interdictor on grid, they are going to be shooting at you first. That's why we've got the group shield booster still sitting here in our mid slots. It's a bit of extra boosting, and it helps heal up our fleet if there's anyone nearby, especially useful for gate camps. I've then swapped the lows here for an adaptive invulnerability field and a small shield booster. It just needs to be a few seconds to survive whilst I GTFO. Get the frag out of there. Ultimately then, that means I've swapped the afterburner for a small micro warp drive. The aim again here is that I can drop a bubble, and then I can immediately micro warp drive to the edge of it with everything else running. Group shield boosters running, the adaptive invulnerability field's running, the shield booster itself is running, and I'm trying to keep myself alive long enough to get to the edge of that sphere and warp the heck out of there to whatever I have pre-aligned to. Now, as an interesting aside here, it is possible to swap out perhaps something like the adaptive invulnerability field there in the middle for something like a cloaking device. Obviously you can't fit a covert ops cloaking device, but very useful for things like fleet engagements. You can sit there in your own little bookmark, wait for the fleet to come to you, decloak, drop a bubble, power out of it, and warp to safety, and there's all kinds of craziness that can do. Very useful. I've seen that done before with people basically sit there cloaked next to a gate. The attackers come into the gate, they see there's no one really there, they go to warp forward, at which point you decloak and you grab them all instantly there, whilst they're still amassing, whilst they're still trying to get ready to go. We've seen it done in counter defenses on citadels, that kind of thing, where they arrive at the gate and rather than rushing straight into the citadel, they get held at the gate by an interdictor and just blabbed off grid from there. Very funny way of doing it, I feel. Now, I haven't changed out the rigs here, this is still the same ship, but at this point, if you're going for an interdictor in purposes of actual interdiction, I would change at least one, if not two, of these lower slot rigs, the engineering rigs, to targeting relays, so that you can lock onto things faster and get that warp scrambler into effect if you're sitting on a gate camp, for example. And for the 3 rigs on the other side, the combat rigs, those should all be swapped out for maximizing how big your shield is. That will help you survive. Your job isn't doing damage, it's to, ultimately just hold, and it's to tackle, it's holding things in place. Now you may think, well, then why not swap to strike cannons, because you want that survivability, you want that range. Again, it's not about dealing damage. You can put strike cannons in there. The reason I still stick with the autocannons is in case anything comes close, it just gives you the option to apply some fast DPS and hopefully kill it before it kills you. Ultimately though, don't go for big expensive modules here. If you're going for something like an interdictor in fleet ops or in a gate camp, your best bet is ultimately keep it cheap. Literally fit Mark 5, Mark 7, Mark 9 gear. Don't even bother with storyline gear. Keep it as cheap as possible, because chances are you're going to be the first target, you are going to get destroyed. Anyway, let's actually jump to have a look at a gate camp, and we're going to talk about what gate camps are used for, and why they are a necessary part of EVE, and why you should learn to embrace them and deal with them, rather than just complain about their existence. Alright, so I guess we've hit that point in the video now where I need to talk about gate camps. I'm not going to teach you how to do a gate camp, I've covered that in other videos, namely the Thrasher Interdictor video, or the How Interdictor Sphere Launchers Work video. Go check those ones out if that's what you're looking for here. What I want to talk about is, what are gate camps? Why do people do gate camps? Like, what purpose do they serve in the game? And why do people get so angry about them? Now, that last part is kind of, on the surface at least, really easy to answer. It's very easy just to give the dismissive, people don't like gate camps because they don't like losing ships in an unfair way. Now, that relies on the concept of gate camps actually being unfair and unavoidable, and my argument has always been that even before interceptors were added, even before bookmarks were added, gate camps were not unavoidable. There was counterplay to them, just it's not something people were necessarily thinking of, and they got so used to being able to have complete unfettered access to nullsec that ultimately they got complacent. Now, that's the main purpose right there of gate camps, to stop people having complete unfettered access to nullsec without any form of safety net behind them. What is the point in an alliance if no one can actually grab you in nullsec anyway? The purpose of forming alliances and making friendships and sort of all that diplomacy side of EVE is so that you can travel unhindered through space. Now, obviously, everyone knows Catskull is based out in Innsmother. Innsmother is fairly deep into Null, and it's going to be a real sucky time for us if every time I fly through Scalding Pass, the Great Wildlands, Wicked Creek, or any of those areas there, I'm just instantly hunted down and destroyed. So we form alliances, we make friends with each other, you have trade agreements, and that now means we're blue to each other, which means I have the ability to fly unhindered through their space. If there's nothing that can stop you flying through someone's space, then what's the purpose of putting anyone to blue? Like, before gate camps were a thing, it was easy to fly across the universe into some other corporation's, like, backyard, blow up a couple of their miners, and fly out. There was literally nothing they could do to stop that. If they couldn't lock you down and catch you, you could just run away and, oh no, what now? So gate camps help you protect your sovereign space. They allow you to protect your miners, they allow you to protect the gateways into your sovereign space, basically. N-Rail is one of those systems where things kind of go left, right, up and down, it's all over the place. Now, if you're blue to Catskull and we've put up a gate camp in N-Rail, you're going to sail straight through it. Nothing's going to happen. If you're red to us, you're going to get caught and destroyed. That pushes for diplomacy. That pushes for those corporations that are red or grey to us to actually find out why they're red or grey to us and seek to possibly change that. It is part of the social aspect of this game. EVE is all about building and creating this massive universe. So, you've got this tool now that can be used to defend your sovereign space. It stops people, just warping in and warping out willy-nilly. Awesome. But the idea that this is an unfair way of doing so, is it? is it unfair? The argument being there, as I said earlier, people don't like gate camps because they feel like it's an unfair way to lose a ship. Now look, I've lost ships in unfair ways. The Crew War is the famous example I give on this. I was flying through Geminate and Vale of the Silent, I saw that there was a group camping a gate, I flew around them, I jumped through the gate, and then my ship just stopped there. It decloaked and did not warp on. The autopilot seemed to stop. That allowed the guys to grab me, lock me down with several faction cruisers and frigates, blow me up, and then post it all over Reddit like they'd achieved something. Now, I'm not bitter that they blew up my ship and that they were proud of that. I'm glad they found enjoyment in that. EVE is a game about war, and we'll come back to that in a second. What annoyed me was that I didn't have a counterplay to that. There was nothing I could have done differently, because I tried to do the right thing and warp away before they jumped through the gate behind me, but things didn't work that way. Now, with gate camps, however, there are numerous different ways that you can counterplay this. One, you can send someone ahead of you in an interceptor, or in a covert ops ship, and they can scout the route and let you know if it's safe. Or, if you're smart enough, you can jump into a system if you're in a fast enough ship, and if you're in a gate camp, whilst you're cloaked, you turn around, you approach the gate you've just come back to, and as the cloak drops, you should just have enough time to jump through before you're destroyed. It gets you back to safety. You can also, of course, open up the star map and check to see if there are any gate camps along the route by looking for ships that have been destroyed in the last hour, and of course you can just make sure you're flying through friendly space. Ask your alliance. We've got alliance chat. Hey guys, is N-Rail safe? No, don't jump into it then. Simple as that. That is the counterplay to gate camps, and that's existed before bookmarks and before interceptors were a thing. You could do it with covert ops probes, herons, etc., all the way back then. Now, ultimately, I said there, war is a vital aspect of EVE. EVE is a player versus player game, and I don't necessarily mean that in the sense of your job is to go around blowing each other up. If you're an industrialist or your main focus is on PvE, that's awesome, and I get that. I get that not everyone has that competitive streak where they want to blow up other people's ships, but EVE at its core is a player versus player game driven by the necessity of war. If there's no war, then very few people are losing their ships because you know what content you can do when you just kind of autopilot that content and you earn more risk. So if people aren't losing ships, they don't need to replace them. If they don't need to replace them, no one's buying ships. And if no one's buying ships, there's no point selling ships. If there's no point selling ships, there's no point building them. And if there's no one building ships, then what's the purpose in mining ores? And ultimately, if you've got the ships that you want and you don't lose any of them ever because you can just do the safe content over and over and over again, what's even the point in playing? What's the point in earning ISK? It just becomes a high score, and whoever started first, or has a particular type of ship, wins. It's pointless, it's boring, it's dull. War, whether you are actively involved in it or not, is what makes EVE tick. It is the underlying cogs that make this game work. That means gate camps destroy ships. Destroyed ships need to be replaced. Replacing ships requires industry. That's how this works. So if you're complaining about gate camps as an industrialist, you're complaining about one of the things that actually creates a demand for new ships. And I get that, again, we're talking about this with insurance being a thing, and people are going to sit there and go, like, you know, oh, insurance is ruining the game. No, it's not. I've gone over this so many times. It's not insurance ruining the game. It's how a small group of people reacted really badly to the insurance and then kind of triggered everyone else into reacting really badly too. And that caused a cascade effect. Ultimately, the biggest problem with the game right now isn't insurance, it's how people massively, knee-jerkingly overreacted to the insurance. But without war, you wouldn't have any of this. War is the entire purpose of the game, and it's why for all my bluster, all my laughing and, you know, making comments at GenFed and all this, purely because they're the other side of the war, I have no problem with gen-fed pilots. I think, you know, the fact that we're at war, that's creating content. Blowing ships up is the entire point of EVE, so great on them for blowing our ships up, and it's great fun blowing their ships up. It keeps their industrialists in work, it keeps us all playing a game and having fun. So, how do you avoid gate camps? You scout for them. If you land in one, you just learn how to deal with it, either back out of it or be in a ship that you know can escape it, or just ultimately don't get into it in the first place. Scout, ask ahead, use your star map. That's how you avoid gate camps. Anyway folks, I think I've rambled on about this one entirely too long here. That is a topic I've wanted to talk about for a long time, because I think a lot of people get really salty when they lose ships, and they kind of assume, I think, that I do as well. That Crew War one, people were right out there going, we killed Benzie, you know, lol, he must be so angry at this. And it's like, no, I was just disappointed that I didn't get to lose it in a fun way, but, you know, ultimately I can build another one, we can have some more fun. I went back there a couple of days later looking for a fight and couldn't find it, sadly. You've witnessed me lose a succubus and a worm on camera, and I laugh my head off every time it happens. I literally lost a Rupture 2 Guardian yesterday to a gate camp in Enrail. Not to the gate camp, I actually jumped through the gate thinking it was safe. I jumped through onto a planet and I sat there to say to guys, there's a lot of reds in system, but it doesn't appear that any of the actual gates are camped. Only for that group to jump onto the same planet, and it was literally 10 of them, blew up my Rupture Guardian in split seconds, and really well played to them. Really well played. There was no one on the gate, but they caught me at the planet and got me that way instead, and that was hilarious. I laughed so hard at that. Brand new Rupture 2 Guardian, I'd never flown it, I was bringing it back from HiSec, and they got me. They got me, and it was absolutely glorious and magnificent. I then had that evening, I'm being chased by 2 interceptors through along the Carby route, desperately trying to avoid being caught in a catalyst interdictor. So PvP is all part of the fun and games for me, and I love it. It's a necessary part of the game, and I'm glad to get to talk about it now. Anyway folks, you have seen there that this footage has just reset. I've been talking for over 10 minutes now about gate camps and why they should exist, how you can avoid them, and why EVE is fundamentally a PvP game. Here you can see we were unlucky in this particular gate camp, but I do implore you, jump in a Thrasher 2 Interdictor. These are great little solo ships, Tech 9 encounters, Tech 10 anomalies. Great fun in them. You can do some gate camps, go out PvP roaming with them, blow some ships up, have a good time, and feast on the salty tears of anyone who complains. Tell them to come watch this video and understand that war is what makes EVE work. Anyway folks, thank you for watching this one right the way to the end. A little bit of a self-indulgent rant for me here, but I'm hoping you've enjoyed that. Let me know in the comment section below your thoughts and opinions when it comes to things like gate camps and, of course, the Thrasher 2 Interdictor. Awesome ship and I love it to pieces. Otherwise folks, happy sailing and see you in New Eden.